So good afternoon. Welcome to the International Peace Institute. I'm Maureen Quinn, Director of Programs. And the topic of our policy forum today is peace and development in the post-2015 framework. Now, we're privileged today to have the two co-chairs of the International Dialogue on Peace Building and State Building, Minister of Finance of Timor-Leste, Emilia Perez, and Minister for Development Cooperation of Denmark, Christian Friisbach, as our speakers. Minister Perez and Minister Friisbach will share their perspectives on what has been accomplished since the New Deal for Engagement in Fragile States was adopted in November 2011. As I know that we have a lot of experts in the room, but still, the New Deal for Engagement in Fragile States is a breakthrough agreement that outlines a new paradigm for engagement in countries affected by conflict and fragility. We'll also hear insights from both ministers on how the New Deal can best inform and shape the post-2015 development agenda. Now, it's especially timely to have this discussion today. Last Friday, the two ministers co-chaired the third International Dialogue Global Meeting held in Washington. So we're going to hear today about what the New Deal has accomplished to date on the global level and the national level. Particular areas of interest include progress on indicators for peace building and state building, as well as efforts to manage risk, use national systems, and support improvements in national capacities in countries deeply involved in peace building and state building. Looking to 2015, much work has been done by the United Nations Task Team and through the global consultations on a post-2015 agenda. We recognize as well that the high-level panel on the post-2015 development agenda is hard at work and look forward to the high-level panel's report to the Secretary General in the month of May. Many of us here are closely following the reports and communiques that have come out of meetings in Indonesia, Liberia, Panama, the United Kingdom, and Finland. So today is an opportunity to hear and exchange views on where discussions are headed regarding future global aspirational goals. Now, I've had the pleasure of hearing both ministers speak in other forums addressing these issues. And so I know that we're in for a lively and inspiring discussion. So welcome to both of you to the International Peace Institute. I want to briefly introduce Minister Perez, and we're going to ask you to speak first. I think you're well known in this community, and certainly we appreciate your coming back because you were here last April. Minister Emilia Perez was appointed the Minister of Finance of Timor-Leste for the second time in Prime Minister Gusmau's government. She's known as a reformist. At the Ministry of Finance, Minister Perez has expanded decentralization to expedite service delivery. She is pioneering policies in one of the first fragile and post-conflict countries to go from negative growth rates to 3 years of average double-digit economic growth. The minister has promoted transparency and accountability and strengthened institutional capacity in the area of public financial management. Minister Perez is also leading at the global level. She is the co-chair of the International Dialogue on Peace Building and State Building and is the chair of the G7+, representing 18 fragile and post-conflict nations. She is also a member of the Secretary General's high-level panel on the post-2015 Millennium Development Goal agenda. Minister Perez, the mic is yours.
Thank you very much. And is it afternoon already or not? Yes, it is. Yes. We've just had lunch, so it must be afternoon. Yes, I have. I just came back from Washington, where we had lots and lots of meetings. And it is a pleasure to be here again. I love coming to talk shows like that in the sense that it also makes me reflect on the work that we do every day. Sometimes I'm one of the doers, so I don't have much time to sit down and reflect whether I'm doing the right thing or not. And it's opportunities like this where we are challenged by your questions, then we can say, okay, if I can answer them and I can argue it properly and have an answer, then I'm okay. Now, with the New Deal, when it was adopted in Busan, I think for us, we look at it as a turning point, a historical turning point in the sense that the New Deal has three very big elements, as you all know. The peace building and state building goals, which is filling the gap for us fragile states between us achieving or not achieving the MDGs. The conversation, many of the fragile states will not be able to achieve the MDGs because there was something missing, and that was the lack of institutions and the lack of peace and stability in our countries. And so the New Deal offers us this. And also there's two principles that are so important, the focus and the trust. Focus helps us lead the process in our country. It actually helps us understand our own problems. The F stands for fragility assessment, and many of us, about at least 5 of us, the fragile nations, have already done our fragility assessment for the first time in our history, because normally we don't do that. Normally, development partners, multilateral agencies, they come in, they go and talk to you, and they write big reports about you. They've diagnosed your illness, and you don't even know what sickness you are suffering from. And then the medicine comes, and you're only aware of it when something starts happening. You go, oh, it doesn't work. I never asked you for that. And because they said, but you were sick that way, and that's why we gave you this medicine. Now, with the New Deal, we are diagnosing our own sickness, and then we are talking to our partners, building a consensus that that is what is the problem. Let's together find a solution. So that's a very important thing, and this New Deal brings it to us. And then, of course, the trust principles is principles that are supposed to change the behavior, mainly of our partners. Focus changes our behavior, because we need to lead, we need to own the process, and we need to guide our development partners of where we are wanting to take our country, so that they can align their programs against or around our priorities. Without that, how can they do it? So it's a two-way process. So that's what the New Deal does to us. And the other very important thing that probably people take it for granted, but we don't. We recognize in the international dialogue, the G7 Plus, or the fragile states, which are now 18, we are given a space to actually be able to sit on the same table or at the same table with our development partners and talk like equal, so that we don't feel as if we are the beggars, they are the charity, giving something to you, helping you out. No. Because we didn't cause fragility in our country. It's just circumstances that led us to that way. And we are a government trying to find the formula to get us out of this fragility. And then having our partners sitting with us and analyzing our problems, understanding the problems from our perspective, is very important. And we, from there, we are also understanding our partners, their constraints, their rules. These 3 years have really increased our knowledge, even about the institutions like the UN, the World Bank, the IMF. What are their mandates and how does that work, so that we can make the best out of their help in the country. So all this is actually very positive things for us. And then at the same time, it's given us confidence for us to be able to talk without feeling as if we are compromising our country. Because very often people don't, I suspect, especially with the diplomats, nobody wants to say anything bad about your country. You're always trying to paint the better picture. But us, finance ministers and the people that are on the ground, we go down into what are the root causes, what are the problems, because you only have so much money and you have to make that money cover everything. So we need to find out what is the problem, how best to use that money, and therefore we like to put the problems on the table and talk about it. And now we are trying to engage our foreign affairs to do the same. there is nothing wrong about it when we admit that there's a problem. There is something wrong if you don't address it once you know it. So I think, and the other thing that we've come a long way also is together with the development partners under the umbrella of the international dialogue, we have worked on indicators, as you've mentioned before, and now just in Washington on in our third meeting, global meeting, we we accepted the interim list of indicators, and now we are going to try, test it out on the ground and see which ones of them are working or not, or will work, so that we have concrete evidence to offer for the post-2015. Right now, with the 2015 agenda, we are talking, we are advocating, we are making our voices heard in every plenary, every forum that we get a chance to participate. But we are facing challenges there. Okay, security is still separate from development, et cetera, for whatever reasons. But when it comes onto the ground, we need to work together. We need to link all this together, because you can't, like I say, in my own country, if we did not have stability, peace and stability, we could not have moved forward to those double-digit growth, economic growth, where now private sector start moving, taking actions, and slowly making the economy work. So I think these are the things that the new deal has come, and I'm hoping that my co-chair here will add on more things that I have not touched.
Well, thank you, Minister Perez. I really appreciate your point about when you stress that you have got space at the same table, and it gives you the opportunity to learn and work together cooperatively with with your donor partners, and about the institutions in Washington, the financial institutions, and here in New York. So now it's a pleasure. I'd like to introduce Minister Christian Friis Bach. Minister Friis Bach is Denmark's Minister for Development Cooperation. And Minister Bach started his career in academia. Of course, early on he worked with the World Bank. Later, he served as assistant professor in development economics at the Institute of Economics, University of Copenhagen, and subsequently as associate professor at the Royal Danish Agricultural University. In 2005, Minister Friis Bach became international director at the Danish NGO, Dane Church Aid, a position he held for 5 years. Prior to being appointed Minister for Development Cooperation, Mr. Friis Bach acted as special advisor for EU Commissioner Connie Hedegaard, and he has been the co-chair of the International Dialogue on Peace Building and State Building since January 2012. So, Minister, the mic is yours.
Thank you very much, Maureen, and thank you very much to the International Peace Institute to host this dialogue. It's much appreciated, and it's also very much needed. And thank you to Emilia, my good co-chair, for giving us an excellent introduction as always, and for taking the leadership she does in promoting this international agenda, which I humbly try to follow and support. Now, it's true this agenda around the New Deal has moved a lot. I often compare, I was in development also 10 years ago, and I often compare what we discussed back then with today, you know, and back then many of us said, you know, if we were asked, should we engage in fragile countries, we would say, probably not, it's too risky. If you were asked, should we engage through the state in fragile countries, we would say definitely not, because the state is too weak. And if you were asked back then, should we try to combine the security and development agenda, we would say, oh no, don't do that, it's too dangerous. And on all three accounts, we say exactly the opposite today. And that's very much been the feature of the New Deal, that we now know we need to engage in fragile countries because the risk of not engaging is much larger than the risk of engaging, not only for the world, because we know the problems here can spread to the rest of the regions and the rest of the world, but especially for the people living in fragile state, they take the biggest risk of them all. And by 2015, half of the people living on less than $1.25 will probably be in fragile states. They take the biggest risk of them all. Should we work through the state institutions when they are so weak? Yes, we should, because we should work through state institutions and the states in fragile countries exactly because they are weak. Exactly because we need to build a social contract in fragile countries between a state and the people. A contract that is shaped by active state engagement in building schools and health clinics and roads and all that it takes to shape development. And only if we manage to build this social contract, will we get any kind of hope for stability and security and prosperity. And that is how it works. If you ask the people of Afghanistan, what do you think is good about the state? They will say, 90% of them say, well, the state does a pretty good job in education. Exactly because we have managed to make sure that the state delivers the schools in the communities, and that builds a social contract between the state and its people. And should we try to combine security and development? Yes, definitely we must. It doesn't mean mixing them and endangering humanitarian efforts, but it means a strategic integration of security and development in how we approach and try to create progress in fragile states. It's a very necessary agenda. This all needs to inform the post-2015 development agenda, and that's what we are here to discuss. I can remember, and many of you can as well, 10 years ago, what did we talk about when we talked about post-2015 agenda? We talked about fast-track countries and quick-win solutions. And let me tell you, fragile states, they are not fast-track countries, and we don't find a lot of quick-win solutions. But that is where we are now, and we know we need desperately to engage more in fragile states to reach the Millennium Development Goals and to build the post-2015 development agenda. That's why we, in the international dialogue we just had in Washington, at the Delhi meeting, at the Helsinki UN consultation on the post-2015 development agenda, has been a unanimous voice saying we need to incorporate issues of peace building and state building into post-2015, the post-2015 development agenda. We need to have issues of security and stability incorporated into that agenda. I know here in New York, perhaps more than anywhere else in the world, there is resistance to this point. There's resistance to this argument. But I would like to say as clearly as I can that if we do not manage to do it, if we do not manage to build the basic foundation behind the peace building and state building goals into a post-2015 development agenda, that agenda may very well become irrelevant to the situation in fragile countries. It will not appeal, it will not have the impact it should in fragile countries. Because as Emilia describes it better than anybody, that's the reality of what they face, a combination of complex security and development challenges. And if you do not thereby have a post-2015 development agenda that recognizes this absolutely crucial feature of the challenges that fragile countries have, then the post-2015 development agenda will become irrelevant in these countries. So that's one reason why we need to do it. We also need to do it in order to break down the silos that we still have in each and every country and in each and every international institution. We still have silos of implementation, and we think in security and in diplomacy and in development in separate lines of command, in separate lines of institutional frameworks. And the post-2015 development agenda must push us to break down those silos of implementation, because we need the strategic integration of development and security, because one comes with the other. So we have done a lot. The thinking has moved tremendously in 10 years if we think back. But now we really need to incorporate it and into the new post-2015 development agenda. Then we also need to move on implementation. And that was the key of our discussion in Washington. How are we going about implementation? Are we achieving results? And I guess the answer is yes, there are positive steps taken. I think very much of our mode of operation now in Afghanistan is framed by the principle of the new deal. The Tokyo Mutual Accountability Framework is a contractual relationship between development partners in Afghanistan, exactly building on the core principles of the New Deal. The government of Afghanistan must deliver. It must deliver on everything from a credible democratic process, protection of human rights, combating poverty, and solving security issues in Afghanistan. And in return, the international partners must deliver budget aligned, 50% on budget, aligned to national priorities and national principles and policies. That is the deal we struck in Tokyo. Are we coming about the implementation part? Yes, in some ways we are. Denmark, we do deliver 50% of our development assistance to Afghanistan now on budget. And that has managed us, together with other partners and the government in Afghanistan, to build thousands of schools, to print millions of school books, and to get more than 7 million kids into those schools. And that means a lot for every single kid, and 1/3 of them are girls. But it also is a crucial element, as I said before, of state building in Afghanistan. Schools as state building in fragile states, I think, is one of the most precise ways in which you can tackle it. And as said, if you ask the people in Afghanistan, what do you think about your government? 90% of them will say, well, our kids go to school, so we think the government is pretty okay. So we may turn we may turn to the future and forget about the past and the trouble and the conflict that we were in, and try to build a state and a society that we can live in. So it's a concrete example of how it can be done. But let me also say that there is a lot of impatience. When I sit in the international dialogue, both in Washington and wherever we sit, I must say the ones who are pushing are G7 plus countries, and the ones who are not yet delivering as we should is us. And it's not only us, it also comes to the global international institutions. We are not yet delivering according to the principles of the New Deal, and we need to move faster because it's urgent. Take Somalia. Suddenly, out of the air, you could say, by national African leadership, we got a fragile security situation. We have a legitimate government that performs well to any standards that we have seen historically in Somalia. Now we must be there. And we are struggling now to establish a trust fund, and we may get there next year. We are struggling now to align to national priorities, and we may get there in a time. But the urgency is there absolutely right now. The government of Somalia needs to be able to deliver. And if we go in with the projectitis of the past, and delivers outside the government in every single corner of Somalia without giving the government legitimacy and giving the government an impact on the ground, then this government will not survive and will be a government of Mogadishu. It will not be a government of Somalia. And that's the challenge that is there for us, and we need to move much faster on delivering exactly according to the principles of the New Deal. Finally, we need to incorporate many more actors. The civil society has to be part of the thinking in the New Deal, and they are there and giving a strong voice. What we discussed in Washington was to engage the private sector as well, much more into delivering jobs on the ground, because without jobs, we know very well we're not going to get security. My first trip to Yei in South Sudan 15 years ago, I remember standing in the main square in Yei together with more than 200 young men standing there with absolutely nothing to do. And if we can't get them to get some kind of occupation, and if we can't persuade them to put aside their rifles and to engage in growing the crops, then we're not going to get security and stability. So we need a private sector, and there we take a big risk, and we need to be much better to sharing the risk with the private sector in moving in and building prosperous jobs and employment in fragile states as well. They should do so because it can provide good business. They should also do so, the private sector, out of a global responsibility. And some of them reckon that it's necessary. The Danish shipping companies are now engaging to create jobs in Somalia. Do they do that because they want to create jobs in Somalia? Yes, I think they do. They also do it because if there are no jobs in Somalia, there will be pirates in Somalia. And they will, of course, endanger the global shipping industry as they did for so long. So the global corporate responsibility goes for all of us. It goes for governments, it goes for civil society, it goes for the private sector, and we need to engage increasingly more in fragile states to solve the conflicts, to create the peace and prosperity that these countries they desperately need. And we especially need the UN being here in New York. The UN is moving, the UN is engaging. We are really happy with the engagement of the UNDP and the Peace Building Support Office in building a stronger New Deal and building impacts on the ground. But more can be done, and I think that's exactly why we are here. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Friesbach. I particularly thought you were wonderful to share those examples from Denmark's efforts in Afghanistan, what you've seen, what you've been able to do in Somalia, South Sudan. It's, I think, bringing the challenges and the accomplishments here to New York is, I think, very helpful to all of us. So I'm going to open up with one or two questions myself, and then I'll open it up to the audience, and we'll do some rounds of questions. I think we have in the, I know in the audience today we have members of the G7+, the International Dialogue, civil society, I hope the private sector. So I'm looking forward to a range of questions and discussion, exchange of views, particularly looking ahead to post-2015. Mr. Perez, I'd like to start with you and talk a little bit about, you talked about how through the international dialogue, you're at the same table, the same space with your donor partners. But if you could talk as well about the G7+, within the G7+ on South-South cooperation, but also more broadly speaking, as you work on peace building and state building goals, about broadly speaking South-South cooperation. Thank you.
What we actually now call, on the South-South cooperation, we actually call fragile to fragile cooperation, because there is a bit of a difference. Because when you talk South-South, you're talking more about those emerging countries, like the big ones, Brazil and all these others that are okay, moving on already well, but did go through experiences that are there for us to learn. But then fragile states have unique experience, and we are all in a different stages, and we found out that we have many things to share amongst ourselves, and maybe more relevant and more pertinent to the context. And that's what we are doing at the moment. We are sharing those experiences, because to build a nation, the building blocks are not that different. You talk state building. State building, you have to build a state. What does that mean? You have to build institutions. What does that mean? Okay, you have to build your parliament, you have to build your finance ministry, your judiciary, your security ministry, etc. So there's not that many differences. And therefore, how do you do it? And that's an interesting subject. And we haven't even gone deeper. We are now exchanging information. Most of the fragile state ministers that sit together are often finance ministers. So we share. We share public financial management. How do you do it? Where you're up to? Who are the main players? For example, the bank and IMF. And we are now having direct dialogue. Yesterday, we had two dialogues, 9 finance ministers and other planning ministers with the World Bank president and the IMF deputy managing director because they have a big role in helping us setting up those institutions. And then we help each other. For example, a classic example with Timor-Leste is that we have a sovereign wealth fund. So we have natural resources, and many of us in fragile states, we have natural resources, be that oil and gas or diamonds or you name it, minerals. So what do you do with that? You negotiate contracts here, weaknesses. We do not have the capacity to negotiate some contracts so that it benefits us. So we share that. Now, how do you do it? Who have you employed? Which firm? And then we exchange information. Or lessons learned. Are the companies paying taxes? Because now one of the big topic of the post-MDG post-2015 agenda is the domestic revenues. Domestic revenues includes how to make the most out of your revenues, and often you'd start with the natural resources because it's there, while you are still building other sectors to be productive so that you can either export or do whatever. And in here, Timor-Leste, for example, we've had assistance from the north, the Norwegians, and we built a very good sovereign wealth fund. And now we are actually sharing with our other colleagues in the fragile states why we do it. The EITI experience, for example, we sit on the board, and then again we share all this experience, and then everybody say, okay, I want that. And now we are starting to have this cooperation between ourselves in a normal way. Judicial sector as well. Some have done better than others. Another one was, I think, Liberia and Ivory Coast. They managed to get rid of their debt. I forget what the name is. Maybe the ambassador knows. No, the debt. What is it? HIPIC, yes, and they've successfully managed that. So now they are sharing this information with the other states who are very deep in this debt, and that will be an obstacle for them to move forward. How do you do it? So there's lots of experiences and knowledge that we are doing amongst ourselves. Then we also like to learn from other countries that are already moved out of their bad times. Botswana, for example, the way right now they're coming to Timor in September to say how did they do it to have a more inclusive growth using natural resources. And we've spoken to countries like Singapore. I'm talking about my country there. Indonesia, for example. I've sent technical Timorese there to study accounting because we don't have accountants in the finance ministry, and then they've developed these things in their country, and so we're taking advantage of that. So there's a lot of things that can be done in there, and I understand that the United Nations is trying to do something like coordinate all that, because right now we are doing it on our own. Every time we find somebody's done something, we contact. And it's an ad hoc way. It's not yet institutionalized, but I think the United Nations is trying to bring all this together and make it more systematic. So I hope I've answered your question.
Yes, Minister, thank you very much. So Minister Friesbach, I wanted to come back to you before I open it up, because you talked about assistance that is on budget and aligning to national priorities. And that certainly was one of the commitments. And if we looking backwards, Busan was November 2011, looking for progress. But I would think for all of the donors, the issue is how do they manage risk when you do that, when you put your assistance on budget in a country that's coming out of conflict? And so do you have an example of how Denmark is doing that? Thank you.
Well, one thing I do every time I go to Parliament is talk about risk, because I think that's the main audience to address the issue of risk. And we see that in many national parliaments in Europe now, that they are detracting from budget support, from sector program support, and especially perhaps in fragile countries, because the risk willingness is actually diminishing. It's getting smaller in many European countries right now. So when I go to Parliament, I talk about nothing but risk, and I talk about as I said, weighing, managing risks first of all together. I think we need to do much more on the risk analysis side, and thereby develop risk management tools together across institutions. I think Denmark have been doing that in Somalia, in South Sudan, and others together with the UN institutions, trying to develop new risk analysis tools and risk management tools. I think that is definitely a part of it. And then to be really, really visible about how risks they weigh up against each other. As I said in my introduction, there's a risk of engaging. We know fragile states are definitely all the way down there on the bottom of the list of corrupt countries when it comes to transparent international indicators. So the corruption is a huge risk. The risk of lack of implementation of projects, it's tremendously high because governments are weak, state institutions cannot perform as they should. So we will have projects that will fail, and we will have projects where the money will disappear. And that's a risk. But you have to be really open about it, transparent about it, and then you have to say and do the analysis and say, well, the risk of not doing this is bigger. If we were today moving out with our combat troops of Afghanistan without having, at least in some areas, a quite well-functioning state, then we could be absolutely sure that Afghanistan would turn into chaos within seconds. But now today we have a country, I said, where you have a social contract, schools are there, health clinics are there, 80% of the population can reach a health clinic within an hour or so. It was less than 10% if you go back 10 years. 7-8 million kids in school, it was less than 1 million 10 years ago. That's a social contract. There's a social, very physical contract that the Ministry of Finance, who back 10 years ago had one computer and a telefax, in the entire Ministry of Finance in Afghanistan, today have a fully electronic financial system. They pay out salaries electronically to thousands, hundreds and thousands of people in Afghanistan electronically directly to people's bank account. That's a social contract. These people will think a little while, well, should we turn back to the past or should we wait for the next paycheck? We'll wait for the next paycheck. And that's a very concrete social contract. And if we had not managed to do that in Afghanistan, it would have, within a few months after we would turn out our combat troops, it would have failed. A lot of things have gone bad in Afghanistan. A lot of things have not moved. There are projects continuously that fail, and we have corruption cases we deal with every month from Afghanistan. But the risk of doing that is much lower than the risk of not doing it, of not engaging.
Okay, so I'm going to open it up to our audience today. I'd ask you to identify yourself. Also, we're webcasting live, so please hold the mic steady. And finally, we are also, for all of you on the social media, please use your Twitter throughout our discussion. So I open it up, and so I'm going to try and we'll take a few questions, and then we'll turn back to the minister. So we have over here, and then John in the front. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Erin McCandless, and I work with Interpeace and also represent the civil society platform on peace building and state building, which is supporting the New Deal process and working to bring civil society from both the G7+ and the international partners into that process. And I just first want to congratulate you on your excellent stewardship of this process. I think everybody's very happy with the work that both of you are doing and leading us. The question that I think civil society is really concerned with is really the links between the two main areas of work within the New Deal, which is the indicator and fragility assessment processes within countries, and then the implementation side of things, including the compacts. And while I think we're quite happy with how the fragility assessments went in terms of the roles that were given to civil society in terms of participating in these processes. There's some concern that perhaps the implementation side and the development of the social contracts are really being developed between donors and governments only. And I think there's a concern that civil society also wants to be very much a part of that in terms of priority setting, understanding the links between and helping to identify the links between priorities and risk and so forth. So maybe you could let us know your thoughts on that. Thank you.
So we'll take John here in the front.
John Hirsch from the International Peace Institute. Well, first of all, thanks to both of you very much for your presentation right now and for your terrific work. I have two questions. One is about I want to draw you out further on how to overcome all this resistance from the developed world. Both of you made all these points about risk, about stasis, people locked down, about silos, about corruption. But you also spoke about trying to have an equal place at the table. or having one, at least in a formal sense. So I want to have your further thoughts on how to overcome all these constraints and resistance. And my second question has to do with countries, fragile countries that do not have national strategies that would assist their people, and what you think you might do. I was thinking, whether this is current or not, about Pakistan. I was there 30 years ago. There was no investment in education on the development side, zero. It was all on agriculture and fixing canals and so on. And of course, the result was the madrasas and all of this that has resulted from that. So I wanted, that's just an example, to kind of get your thought on how do you get a fragile state to have the kind of strategies that make sense highlighted in their own national plans. Thank you.
Okay, so maybe Minister Paris, we'll turn to you first. Thank you.
Thank you. If I could answer the last first about how do you get a fragile state to have a national strategy, I'm going to answer it from my perspective. First of all, like we in the G7 Plus, Pakistan is not there. So I'm not sure who describes them as fragile states. Do they do that or not? I don't know. But in the G7 Plus, it is the countries themselves is a voluntary forum. So they are saying to us, I want to join you. I like your the work you are doing. I like the way your group works, and I want to benefit from sharing the knowledge and the experience and be part of this New Deal business. Right now, Djibouti, actually, 2 days ago, met with me in Washington and says, how do I join your group? I said, well, just write a letter to the chair. But I'm the chair, so. But I still, it doesn't mean anything. I say I have to go and submit to the other ministers when we have our ministerial meeting. So it's a voluntary recognition that the country first has to say, I feel that I'm fragile. Because many people don't like the word fragile. They define it in a different way. There's connotation. I'm saying fragile to me doesn't mean fragile to somebody else here, because sometimes you say fragile means corruption, this and that. Not to me. Fragile is like, look at this glass. It is fragile, so take care, handle with care. And because we have weak institutions doesn't mean that we have corrupted institutions. It's just that the people, I take my country, 24 years fighting in war, where did they go to universities? How could they learn to become an accountant? My Ministry of Finance, when I first came in, we did a test. 60% had third grade numeracy. What do? Now they're going to make mistakes. Sometimes they pay people $2,000, they pay $20,000. And so we have to go, and lucky we have the system to go and get it back. Things happen, so we have capacity issues. Of course, other people that are naughty, they take advantage of that and do things that shouldn't be done, and then you get into corruption. So once they get in, then they have to want to do a national strategy, etc. And so the focus, the principles of focus in the New Deal is exactly about that. You do a fragility assessment on yourself, and then what? Now you know where you are in the fragility spectrum. So how do you get yourself out of that from level 1 to level 2? Because there's about 5 levels. The fragile states came up with 5 levels. Then you have a plan, and that plan is your strategy. Okay, and that takes me to the question asked by the previous speaker on how do you link indicators and fragility assessment? Exactly. If you do a fragility assessment, first you have to have a spectrum. Like you have to get the definitions right. You have to have some sort of consensus. What is a crisis for you, a crisis for him, a crisis for me? How do I describe that? Then you have the next level and the next level. If I'm not mistaken, the World Bank, UN, etc., they don't even have that. And they are a much better resource than all of us put together. And they could not come up with a definition. If you go to the World Bank, you find out that they have the fragile states, they have like 20-something or 30. You go to the UN, it's got like 50. And they call it least development countries or whatever. So you've got all sorts of names. So we in the fragile nations, now the 18 of us, we are saying we are going to define our own, what do we mean when I am in crisis? What do I mean when I'm in recovery? What do I mean if I'm in transition? I am in transformative stage. I am in resilience stage. This is defined. Out of that, you have indicators. Because to get from one level to another, you get it. This is the issue of the current indicators, the interim indicators that we have more or less said, okay, let's test it. Give time to time. I know the fragile technical group is meeting very soon to actually continue this work so that we can build the consensus, build the same understanding amongst us. Then we can start talking to development partners and say, this is the understanding we have. Now, then I go into the social contracts, yeah, everybody wants to be in now. You can't, it's one step at a time. Let first the government to talk to their own people. Often they don't even have time to talk to their own people. They're talking to donors, they're talking to this, we discuss it. Often there's only 24 hours a day. And if you give them all to the donors, you don't have time to your constituencies. So you have to, it's logistics, it's reality. It's very good already that the government has a contract with the people and with the donor. The next step, let's bring in the civil society who is more sensitive towards issues of development. Then, of course, the private sector. And I know the civil society and private sector do not see eye to eye. In my country, they even are rivals because they think, private sector thinks that the NGOs are taking all the money, and NGOs thinks the private sector is doesn't care. And, we have to deal with all that stuff. So I think the good thing is that we already say everybody should be together. Everybody should be in it. All the stakeholders have a role. But when do they have this role? There's a time frame, I think. In the international dialogue, the civil society is already sitting down there. Some of the countries, some of the fragile states, the civil society is not fully there yet. So we are still working on this. Some are overboard, civil society is leading in everything. In other countries, there's no civil society. So let's find a balance step by step, I think. Give time to the process, and it should be there. Thanks.
Thank you, Minister. And I love your focus on the clarity and the issue around language, how that becomes certainly an issue among diplomats, among nation states. So I want to give the Minister Friesbach a chance, then we'll take another round of questions.
Thank you to Erin from Interpeace. Thank you for your work in the platform and building the agenda. It's much appreciated that you engage. I think you have a good point that the civil society has been there at the global level. It has been there in the dialogue we've had. But perhaps the most important thing is, of course, at the local level and to implement, to influence the implementation level at the local level and each and every country. As Emilia says it, the stage and strength of civil society differs a lot in fragile countries, but in all countries it should be there. And we should remember that the very first peace building and state building goal is legitimate politics. It's legitimate politics. That's the first goal. And that has to do with an inclusive political process, and their civil society should definitely be part. And when I now look down at the indicators, and I forgot to say that, and what have we achieved? We actually have now welcomed an indicative list of indicators for peace building and state building, the peace building and state building goals. And it's also from those indicators that we hope that the future post-2015 development agenda should be perhaps also influenced when we look at indicators for post-2015 development. But when you look at the indicators we have for legitimate politics, it is a little bit about political parties and the number of demonstrations. I think the indicators are brilliant work. It's done by the Peace Building Support Office together with the Democratic Republic of Congo leading that working group. I think it's a really good platform, but perhaps not to say indicators solves it all, but we need to have our eye on civil society engagement in political processes in countries. I think that's a very valid point in the implementation level. So note taken of that, and we will reflect upon it in the dialogue as good as we can. Now to John, how do you break down the resistance first when your first point. I think if I may quote the co-chair of the international dialogue, Emilia Pires, what she said continuously, this is not about money, this is not about more money, it's about better use of money. Because I think a lot of the resistance, perhaps also here in New York and amongst other countries, is that there is this fear that this is about a group kind of identifying themselves and thereby trying to attract a larger share of the cake. It's not what it's all about, and that's Emilia Pires have said that continuously, repeatedly, loudly throughout the process. This is about better use of the money that there is. It's about framing a cooperation that creates a greater impact. So that's an important point to stress. And then, of course, the major way of breaking down resistance is proving by results that it works. And I think we already have, in several occasions now, proof that things can be done in a different way, and when you do it in a different way, it works. Emilia Pires, Timor-Leste is a good example. I think in Afghanistan we have learned the lessons. Liberia is moving forward on a number of solid principles based on the New Deal. Now we have Somalia coming in and wanting to engage and do it according to the New Deal principles. They are now engaging in building a compact. They're engaging in building financial mechanisms that can make sure that we can work through Gulf state functions. The impacts are there, and that's going to break down resistance in the end. I'm hopeful to see that happen. And then, John, also you say the Pakistan and the schools. I very much agree. I think schools is the most crucial state-building feature probably that you can focus on, where you have the quickest impact and the most important results. I remember, and this is then another anecdote, but I met an ambassador who was in Somalia, in Mogadishu, 20 years ago. There was a golden opportunity back then. We all remember. There was a golden opportunity. Suddenly there was a space in history where we were, where we are perhaps today. Suddenly you had some kind of fragile security, you had some kind of legitimate government, and there you could have done something. And we did not react. And he told the story that he walked in the streets of Mogadishu, and then the international community had not really yet engaged probably in building schools. And then he passed one of those radical schools, the Madrasa Quran schools or whatever it was called. And outside that school, he saw a number of kids who were playing around. And when the boys, they saw him, they looked at him and they did like this. And he remembered that very clearly. Now think about it. 20 years back, where are these boys today? They are in Al-Shabaab. And that has created many of the problems we have seen in Somalia. So getting schools in early, and getting education systems to work and providing a decent alternative to the other schools that we may see pop up in fragile situations is absolutely crucial. And it creates the social contract. So I agree on you on the schooling thing, and that's what we have tried to engage heavily on in Afghanistan.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. And so we have a bunch of questions. I know Diana in the back was waiting, so we'll start with you, and I'll come around to the others.
Thank you, Ambassador, for allowing me to speak. Maybe
if you could introduce yourself.
Yes, my name is Diana Sutikno from the Indonesian Mission. I've been actually dealing with peace-building, peacekeeping issues at our mission. It's been quite a daunting experience, of course, not less than daunting, being very challenging, but I think there are a lot of good developments and also challenges in terms of our conversations at the UN level when we talk about state peace building, post-conflict peace building and peacekeeping. I think the community in New York knows very well what's been happening, and I would like to, before continuing further, to warmly welcome Minister Pires in our midst. And of course, around the same time, I think our special envoy from Indonesia as the co-chairs together with Liberia and United Kingdoms are briefing member states of the UN on the post-2015 agenda. Having said that, I think I would like to just comment and then agree wholeheartedly what Minister Pires already mentioned about the true, genuine implementation of national ownerships. When you talk about getting people on board, and there are some time frames, and that when you talk about inclusivity, when a country transforming itself, transitioning from conflict to development or from conflict to democracy, they will be different from country to country. And I would like to also maybe using many of good examples that Timor-Leste, our very close neighbors in our region, that Indonesia and Timor-Leste, I think, have been undertaking various good bilateral activities and cooperation, South-South, triangular. And I think what I would like to know is, while you are, I think, if I'm not mistaken, you're still co-chairing on the G7 Plus and the New Deal, how can you rate, but of course very roughly and very informally, the success of post-conflict countries in undertaking dialogue with development partners, and what are the gaps between post-conflict countries trying to define their own national priorities and what developing partners at least see them what they would like to do, so that there is sort of like a middle ground. Because you've seen, we don't want, forgive me for being very, very candid, a new type form of donor post-conflict countries relationships. And I think this is something very important to hear from you yourself as the co-chair, so that we can know that there are some good success, that this is a good deal that actually benefits the post-conflict countries, not just the donors, or both of them are in the winning situations. And I think many of us would like to learn more about this from you, Minister. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Deanna. And I think it's Ms. Chowdhury here in the front. Yes, thank you. If you want to, we have a mic up here in the front. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Pirjo Suomela-Chowdhury from the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Finland. Thank you very much for the opportunity to say a few comments and perhaps one question. It is very difficult to add anything to all that has been said after these presentations and interventions, but a couple of comments. First of all, I just want to join those who have emphasized here and elsewhere the importance of including peace, security, and fragility issues on the post-2015 development agenda. I think it's quite clear that they are a missing piece in the Millennium Development Goals that in many ways have served very well. And it is clear that in the next development agenda, they will need to be included. The two words that we hear more and more of are fragility and resilience. It is clear that in the next development agenda, we have to formulate it in a way that includes these two things. We have to move away from fragility that could, in fact, potentially affect many different kinds of countries. And we have to move towards more resilience. A word and concept that is in fact linked to so many different aspects of development, and therefore a very complex concept. In Finland, we are actually very encouraged by the way this issue has been included in these discussions and consultations on post-2015 development agenda. It is already a very significant signal that in the consultations this issue was so prominently included. Finland has been very happy to be involved in the consultation process on conflict, violence, and disaster. Together with the UN system and with the governments of Liberia, Indonesia, and Panama. We held last month in Helsinki a final wrap-up meeting of this consultation process, and there, as Minister Friesbach just said, it was unanimously agreed that the next development agenda must address the causes and consequences of conflict, violence, and disasters, all these three issues. We held here in New York last week a briefing on this consultation process, and I have to say the popularity of that briefing event was one demonstration of how very important and crucial this theme is on the next development agenda. And then I have a question which you have already to an extent or in many ways addressed here, but nevertheless I want to repeat it. As this process on formulating the post-2015 development agenda goes to the next phase, and we also reach the intergovernmental process, how to ensure the inclusiveness of the process and how to take into account the realities on the ground. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we'll take one more question in the back. I think it's in the center there. So, woman, I can't see your... There we go.
Thanks. I'm Valerie Folks from Save the Children. I just had a question to Minister Freisbach. I really appreciate the point you're making about the importance of school building as part of state building, and I just want to connect the focus there on children and youth to your idea of a social contract between a government and its citizens. Children and youth don't have the same rights or voices in this social contract as adults, but have an integral role to play in peace building and even state building. So I wondered if you could speak to this issue from your experience and give examples or recommendations on children and youth involvement in these processes. Thank you.
Okay, so I think this time maybe we'll start with you, Minister Freisbach, and then we'll come back to Minister Paris.
Yes, I think the first question, Diana, was primarily to Minister Pires, but just to say that definitely you can find issues of conflict between donor demands and country ownership and leadership of the G7 plus countries, for sure. And that's not an easy circle to square. But I think what we see in these G7 plus countries, that it's a true willingness to really strive to improve on all the core issues that we may have as development partners. And as long and we you know, there's no such thing as focusing only on levels. You know, we have to focus on process, and that as long as the process there moves in the right direction, you know, I think we should also be risk-taking and patient and in the amongst development partners, and that's what we look for constantly in fragile states. When I'm challenged in Parliament with parliamentarians who say to me, how can you support a country where there's death penalty for homosexuals, you know, and do that, you know. But my point is, as long as we see an increased protection of human rights, and the movement is definitely in the right direction when it comes to democracy and human rights and peace building and state building and development, you know, we must be much more stubborn than we have ever been before, and stand ready to engage instead of just running away whenever issues pop up that are definitely not within the vicinity of our core values. But that stubbornness and that eagerness and that engagement is very difficult to mobilize sometimes, and that's why we need to build the global agenda around it. How do we ensure inclusiveness of the post-2015 and our process from now on? Well, I hope the high-level panel will come out with a strong result and a strong set of aspirational goals. They may put it in an annex, so be it. But despite, regardless of where it is, annex or report or wherever, I hope they will come out with a strong set of aspirational goals, and I'm sure Emilia is fighting in the high-level panel for exactly that. Because from there on, it's going to be more difficult. It's just a feeling. You know the New York setting better than I, but I think from the high-level report and onwards, it's going to be more difficult. And so we have to have a strong platform there. And then I think the UN process has to add the legitimacy and the inclusiveness that you speak about. That's exactly what the UN process from there on is all about. I'll be part of the Open SDG working group together with about 90 other people, and I think that's inclusiveness. Well, we are close to ECOSOC in that setting now, but that's what it needs as well. If we need to have an inclusive process moving there, and then civil society, private companies, everybody have to be engaged. And I think thinking back to the the Millennium Development Goals, who were written down on the back of an envelope in the middle of the night somewhere, and then adopted in the UN. This process has been tremendously more inclusive already now. But the consultations have been really good. The Helsinki one, we had the one in Copenhagen on inequality, I think was a brilliant consultation. They've been going on all over the world with active participation. And so already now we are at a much better pace and process than we had 13 years ago. Now, how do we ensure inclusiveness of children? Well, as said, school building and state building comes together as a package, in my opinion. It's crucial to get it right. And their children and youth must be involved as much as they can. It's an obvious thing to do in these countries where in most of them, 75% of the population are amongst the youth and children, So if they are not included, you're never going to build a legitimate political platform moving onward for there. But it is difficult, and I'm not saying it's easy, and organizations like to Save the Children with their local branches, I hope, will be heavily engaged in ensuring it. And it's an obligation on politicians on our side and on the G7 Plus side to ensure that youth and children are definitely engaged and included in the process. Thank you.
Thank you. The questions are not easy. They're hard questions to answer. But I just want to start by saying that sometimes it's good to be at the bottom of the ladder. Why? Because you're at the bottom. What have you got to lose? What more do you have to lose? You already lost it. And this is the approach we in fragile states take. We at the bottom. So if we want to still be at the bottom, let's keep quiet, let everybody step on us, and we're still at the bottom. Nobody's going to care, really. Because after many years of all this help, 1.5 billion people were left behind with all the good intentions of the MDGs. And they're good, they're not bad, but the reality is there for all of us. 1.5 billion, and they are not my figures. They are, I think, the World Bank figures, somebody else's figures. So it's a reality out there. And we are part of that. The G7 Plus, it's about 400 million out of that 1.5 billion. So we, the 400 billion, kind of got together and said, I don't want to be in that bottom of the list. I want to get out of it. I want to get to the ladder of the development. So we were looking for a way out. Now, then we founded this dialogue business. And then we found some partners out there who wants to help. I'm hoping that everybody's got good intentions. I don't know. I work from that perspective. I learned with my prime minister. He does that. He goes, always take everybody on good faith, that they are there for a good thing, not to take advantage of you, not for another agenda. Work on that. Until you prove that they have another agenda, then push them out or expose them on this. Otherwise, let's work together. And then I believe that when we put issues on the table, very honestly, very openly, very transparently, you get people caught if they have another agenda. They get caught. So it has been hard in this dialogue. It's not easy because it takes two to tango. So if we don't speak, if we don't have the courage to speak, us, the fragile state, how are our development partners going to know our perspectives? And we get intimidated. We are human beings. So, and then often our language is not as good as the others because they've got technical people, experts. And now I've made fun of some experts. I'm saying when you talk about fragility, you talk about conflict, we are the experts. because you've never been in conflict. You've never been in a situation of fragility. You don't know. You haven't governed this country. I've been there because I had the privilege of working in the UN, working in the World Bank. That was easy for me. And the moment I became finance minister, my God, it was the hardest job ever I've had to deal with. It is hard. And even within fragile states, when they are just technical people, they have a different way of talking. When they become a member of government, it changes. And this happened with the DRC rep. Before he was a consultant, it was easy for him. Then he became a minister. He came to me and he was like, oh my God, it's so hard. I said, don't give up. Don't give up, because now you're on the hot seat. You have to finish the job. And it was very hard, because you have to deal with so many issues. And nothing is black and white. Now, and I know, because when I came to New York, my ambassador started to brief and says, oh, there's all these countries that don't really agree with what you are saying. And I was like shocked. I said, what? Why don't they agree with what I'm saying? Do they want me to be always at the bottom? And I tried to understand these countries. What was it? What was the problem? And that's when I started to come in and found out that, you have this silo mentality here, the security, the development, and then there are other issues that I was never even aware of that. And we kind of get caught in the middle of all this. And so I said, okay, I'm not going to get caught in somebody else's issues. I just want people to understand what are our issues. We just want to get out of this situation where we're in. We don't want to keep going on conflict all the time. So we really worked hard to set up these peace building and state building goals. If you look at it, and this is what I said to the president of Somalia when I found out there was a government and all these donors were going into Somalia. And then one of the donors who knew about all this and says, Emilia, please, you better go quickly and empower the government. Let them know about what you guys are doing before the donors get in. Because once the donors get in, the government is going to be in trouble because, well, I shouldn't say that, right? It's not that they're going to get into trouble. It's like, unfortunately, it is. Unfortunately, what is going to happen is because everybody's so willing to help. And here's a problem, and my co-chair knows about this, that I said to the donors, you please coordinate amongst yourself before you come into the country. And you know what? They can't do it. This is the bottom line. At the end of the day, there's no trust amongst all of us. That word trust is very important. And we are all human beings. And this is why this international dialogue is a platform for us to know each other as people, as human beings. You should have seen now, before even fragile to fragile state, how can I trust you? I don't know you from a bar of soap. So slowly, we now like a family. And then we are now a family with the civil society. And then we are a family with the donors, the development partners, because we are together. And one day I said in the international dialogue, I said, listen, all of us here in this room, the world is not so nice out there. And I said to some of the INCAF DGs, I said, you have a bigger challenge than we have. Because you're going to have to change your government's mindsetting. Because for years you've been conditioned to work this way. So you have a challenge. Don't come to this table and say, these are my rules. We don't accept that. There's no rules here. Together we are going to work in new rules. But now you have to go back to your government and try to change that. Try to convince the others that are not in this process. I go to my government and try to convince my colleagues who are not in this process. So we are like, there's a word for it, champions. These are champions together. We now have to go and convince others in our own household to get into this game. Civil society also, because before they were acting like opposition to us. They forgot that there is a parliament and there's political parties. This happens. And so after these 3 years of process, the civil society came to me and said, now I found out that when we are in post-conflict, we have to adopt another role. We should not be adversarial. We should be complementary. See, we all learn, we all find a new role for us because of that context. Because you may have good people in the government, you're going to bring them down every time if you are attacking. Because one is bad. Not everybody is bad. Find the champion, help the champion, and then everybody, who doesn't want to be successful? Who doesn't want everybody to speak good about you? Depart from that point. And that's how we've been doing. And then we find one more champion, another more champion, and then we get it. We get a movement. And that's, I think, what we're doing, in fact. So, to the Indonesian rap, we talk. I think Minister back here will be a witness sometimes when we are talking on the phone, and he goes, "Emilia, we do this." I said, no, Minister, this doesn't work. And then I have to go like 1 hour, and we're talking on the phone, and I'm trying to explain to him from our point of view. And then he understands, then he goes and explains to the others. Because sometimes I don't know how to express myself, but I can do it to him because we already know each other. And I know that he wants to help, but he needs also to understand where I'm coming from. And then some of my fragile state colleagues do not have the courage to do it because they are in a worse position than I am. And I tell always to my colleague, I say, you have to be careful, because if you are funding me, how can I speak? My hand is in your pocket. You run, I have to run after you. You stop, I run, I fall. So there is that. So we need to be conscious about that. We need to create the conditions for us to feel strong enough to express all our difficulties. And I believe in the dialogue, we already have that. Fragile states are speaking. Recently, we even had a G7 plus position paper. My God. It's so funny, isn't it? For us to get to that and have a position paper. It's because we felt strong enough that we're not yet there. So we have to get our position paper to make our position clearer. So we also have to do work, that we have to know how to articulate better. We have to do work also. We can't just sit back, because sometimes because we don't do anything, and of course the world has to move. People have to move, action has to be taken. So that is that thing, and I'm hoping that I've answered the question. Just one more only, the inclusiveness of the process when it comes to the government. Yeah, we have to find out. And today you gave us an idea, like some of these countries are friends with other countries. Like we and Indonesia, we are friends, and we have very good examples. The reconciliation process is one of the best. One of the best. My prime minister picks up the phone straight to the president of the Indonesia, and he sends always regards, and he also talks to. There is this communication. When we go to Indonesia, we've forgotten what was the past. We've forgotten. My people in Timor, they look at Indonesia as the model to follow. So, and you have to see it. It was only 12 years, 12 or 13 years, when we we were enemies. And we made this reconciliation a real reconciliation, not a false reconciliation, a real one from the heart. So now, and that's important, that we share now. So you said the way to make sure that maybe we can include these governments, there are governments that we can talk and they can champion our cause. So there will be others that can champion other fragile states, and then we talk to them because the trust is already there. The other problem is that there's no trust, and I find it funny, this open working group. It's certainly open, because it's like so big, And then I hear that one chair, 4 people sit on the chair. Is it? Yes. And I'm thinking, wow, I don't know if that's inclusiveness or that's lack of trust.
Thank you very much. So this will be our last round of questions. I know Jeff has a question on one in the back. So go ahead, Jeff Dillon, and introduce yourself. Thank you.
Jeff Laurenti with the Century Foundation. Forgive me, ministers, for asking a very UN navel-gazing question. But 8 years ago, there was a huge debate within 6 blocks radius of this building about a peace-building commission and architecture being vitally important to dealing with missing gaps in international peace and security and dealing with fragile states that have been torn by conflict. And often cited were the examples of 2 recidivist countries that had had a peacekeeping operation, peacekeepers left, and sure enough, they retrogressed and another peacekeeping mission was necessary. And lo and behold, one of those 2, Minister Pires, was Timor-Leste. And yet Timor-Leste has shown no apparent interest in coming into a cooperative working relationship with the Peace-Building Commission and that architecture. Is it too much of a hassle? Why in Dili is there not any interest in joining the range of other countries that have been part of it? Do you think that it doesn't deliver anything? And correspondingly, Minister Friesbach, when donor countries sit down at the OECD in the Development Assistance Committee to talk about guidelines that they may all share in common, to what extent in dealing with fragile states does being part of a peace-building commission framework matter? Does the peace-building commission and all that architecture really carry any water with at least bilateral donors?
Okay, so we have our last question in the back. No? Okay. Okay, so we'll just take Jeff's. Oh, Ambassador. Yes, I didn't see you. I'm sorry. No. We want to hear from you.
We are part. I'm Marjan Kamara, the Liberian ambassador to the UN, and we're part of the G7. And this is an organization that my president feels very strongly about. Personally, I think the peace building and state building goals are good rules for good governance, and they don't necessarily apply only to post-conflict countries. I think they're good for post-conflict countries, but I think they're also good for countries to avoid conflict. And so in that sense, they have wide application. What I would like you to get into is to dissect a little bit more this resistance. And the minister alluded to it. He said there's some fear that perhaps funding may go one way. But is that all? I mean, what's under it? What are the different dimensions of this resistance? I think we need to understand it in order to overcome it. And that's why I want us to, just from your perspective, you talk to so many countries, so many representatives of various countries in your current positions as co-chairs of the international dialogue. What is it? Thank you.
So 2 great questions to wrap things up. Minister Pires, would you like to go first?
I go with Ambassador's question. Last time when we came here, we had a delegation from Afghanistan, us, and Liberia, and we went to speak to the chairs of those different groups to try to understand and to explain our position. I think I kind of detected one that Minister Friesbach had said, like the possibility of fragile states forming themselves so that they will get a lot of the financing. And that's why we were very strong at saying that we're not talking about getting more money. We are talking about making the best use of the money that has already been given to us, so that we would, if that was one of the fears, for them not to be afraid, because we're not competing for quantity, we were competing for quality. Arguing for quality. If there's any more agenda, they did not tell us. So if there's other agendas, they were not told. So that's why I was saying, the only way to do it is probably the development partners themselves may be in a better position to do that. Second question was Peace Building Commission. Okay. Now, we, Timor-Leste, we learned from our own experience. A lot of the things that are in the New Deal, we also pushed it. Like, for example, the focus, the country-led, country-owned, having your own fragility, your own plans. We fought very hard to do this because that's what we did in Timor. Before, we were not owning the process. And so we let it be. Even our own security, the army and the police was under the UN and the army was under somebody else. And then when the crisis came, who's responsible? Like everybody kind of washed their hands. And then we paid the price for it because we are the ones we suffer. So we said, no, we must take the reins. We are the owners of this country. We are the leaders of this country. We just have to take the responsibility. And so that's what my prime minister did. He says, now I'm going to be the boss of the army, the boss of the police. No more these divisions and stuff like that, because at the end, he got shot, president got shot, and then we didn't know who should have been there to protect. Very hard things. And we did sign off an agreement saying that we were not supposed to be in charge. And so responsibilities, we must own the process and must take responsibility. And so since then, once we did that, things started to turn around because we started to get involved in our own business, understanding our own problems, coming up with solutions. Now, here I say, Timor-Leste's experience is that we have been lucky than many other countries because we had some money on the side, our own money from our revenues. So sometimes we have to act fast. You need to get that money to fix up the problem. Now, problem here, and this is what in the dialogue we say, many countries do not have that money. So that money is actually the donors' money. And then they come into problems because the disbursement rate takes long. And when you take long in the fragile state, the problem becomes exacerbated. I give a very clear example. When you have IDPs, refugees. Refugees, we had 64 camps. They are living in very bad situation. So what happens every day? They don't go to school, they sit in there under the tents, there is young people, etc. So what's going to happen there? They are a condition for instability. Anybody bad can come and take them and do whatever, use them for bad stuff. So we needed to get rid of that situation very quickly. So we had a package, a financial package, whereby we gave them, once we identified what the losses there were, they get that money to go and build their houses. And that needed millions of dollars. And I was not able to get the millions of dollars very quickly from the donors so fast. So this is why when you are in fragile states, you must act very quickly, and disbursement must be quicker. And I was very pleased with the bank. I think the bank yesterday, they said to us that they are going to use a lot of emergency rules for procurement in fragile states, which means supposed to be faster. Therefore, so why a Peace Building Commission? I usually distract myself. Sorry, very quickly.
Just be quick, because the minister.
Yes, and so, well, we got our act together. So why do we have to put a burden on the Peace Building Commission? No need, because we were already starting to come out of that need, and that was we didn't think that there was a need for that.
So, Minister Friesbach, you have the last word.
Thank you very much. Well, also to Jeff, I don't think any of this has come in isolation. Of course, the G7 Plus have taken a tremendous leadership in bringing forward this agenda, but it has been in a synergy with the Peace Building Commission and the Peace Building Support Office, and the very ideas we met with Jan Eliasson earlier today, and his also leadership back then in establishing these new mechanisms and structures, I'm sure have inspired many of us, many of the countries that have now turned it into the New Deal. So it has been an iterative process, and nobody can claim full responsibility or honor for where we have gone. I think the Peace Building Commission have definitely taken us part of the way, but perhaps you lacked there two things: the institution or the state building part, was perhaps not prominent enough, and then the obligations and the kind of on the donor communities and the UN itself, were perhaps not adequately reflected in what we did with the Peace Building Commission and office. And I think right now and today we have a very good cooperation with the Peace Building Support Office in the dialogue and the New Deal, and they are heavily engaged, and I think it's coming together. What are the obstacles, Ambassador? You're right, it's more than the funding, of course, worries that this is about attracting and dispersing funding in different ways and thereby taking something from somebody. It has to do with traditions, it has to do with territories, and I think we've said it continuously. There are a number of inbuilt obstacles in the way we have worked. Now, this very week, we are opening the 3 different rooms in the UN building. We are opening the Security Council room right yesterday, and today the ECOSOC was opened, and on Thursday we will open the Trusteeship Council room renovated by Denmark. You are most welcome, all of you. It's a beautiful room. And those 2 rooms symbols the resistance, right? It should be 1 room. And of course we have the General Assembly, which is 1 room. But it's a little bit crowded in there. But it's, so just to say, of course, the very way we have constructed the UN symbols the silos, and I think the UN is really moving ahead in bringing this agenda together, and the leadership of G7 plus Emilia and her colleagues is helping us a lot in doing exactly that. Thank you very much for all of you for coming, and thank you for good chairmanship.
Thank you all very much. Great. Thank you.